Hi, how are you, everyone? My name is Lucia Gomez. I am the host for today's Critica NYC. I am so happy to be with everyone. I apologize for my setting. I am actually en route to Las Vegas, Nevada, making sure that I have all my COVID, my mask, my hand sanitizer. We There will be a national conference on the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, where I will be hosting a plenary session, and I am really excited about the conversation around the intersection between working rights, immigrant rights, and criminal justice systems. And so, I will be sure to post that, on my on the Facebook feed, on my Facebook feed. But today we're going to have a very interesting conversation on what's been taking place around the Olympics. Now, I wanted to talk about what's been taking place in New York State politics, but I decided that might be a little too heavy-handed for today, considering everything's rolling out, and we're seeing Tish James' report around Governor Cuomo and the allegations of sexual harassment that recently came out. So a lot that is unfolding around that, a lot of details that for some of us is very uncomfortable to hear, to know, and to see, and then hopefully for everyone very uncomfortable. But today we're going to have a discussion around the Olympics and what has been transpiring. And for those of you that may not know, I am a mom of a 14-year-old who happens to be a gymnast. And she's been in gymnastics since about 3.5. 2.5 mommy and me, if you want to count that year of me going to gymnastics with the toddler. But the sport has gone through so many changes in the last couple of years, and it's hit home to me as a parent, not just of a gymnast, but of an athlete. And as a single mom, having and knowing that I am bringing a child to a gymnasium, to after school programs, right? So that kind of thing. And then finding myself in a world of politics and dynamics and just like athleticism that I needed to understand and I didn't grasp, and then inner city conversations versus where she was having gymnastics take place, and then the national politics around the sport and our young women and our young girls, and elite sport like gymnastics in many cases is intense. When I look up the hardest sports in the world, or the top 10 most difficult sports, why did I look that up to decide which sport I wanted my daughter to enter? And gymnastics has to be one of the hardest sports out there. And they say well, anyway, let's have a conversation, right? I want to invite, Traci Stanard, Summer Stanard, right? Who has been a great friend and ally in the last couple of years that I reached out to her as a performance coach to have a conversation about, what has happened. Forget about the technicalities of what has happened with the sport in terms of how many members and, what age and who went and who traveled and who didn't, because I think that in and of itself has a lot of conversation that could be covered, and not as important as the part about what Simone Biles, the gymnast, right, that we've been watching and eyeing, has raised the conversation to be in these last couple of days. And so, the title of our program, The Cost of Winning, right, Redefining Excellence. It took me a while to figure that out, but Traci, I want to invite you to talk to us a little bit about not just what you do, right? Because people call me nuts when I oh yeah, my daughter sits not with a therapist. She does also now sit with a therapist, right? But she sits with her performance coach at least once at that time when we were, having more issues. But Traci, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I started gymnastics when I was 6. I really didn't get intense in the sport until I was 11, which still sounds kind of funny and young. But in the sport, it really does require you to get involved and decide if you want to remain at a very high level at a young age. And I stuck with it. I was on the national team by the time I was 13. And then I was in the 1992 Olympic trials by the time I was 16, and then decided to go to University of Utah to compete for their D1 collegiate team. And during that time, I was really able to decide kind of my career path and use my experiences from Olympic trials and from national team, and just paving my own path and picking up some great international experiences as well, and bring that into the field of psychology, and then also get my master's in sports psychology to continue to work with not only gymnasts but all athletes. So that's what I do now, and it is definitely a developing field, especially with the intensity of sport these days.
Well, and I'm gonna say it because we talk about it in other kinds of fields, right? But I could just only imagine what has just happened, and we'll get into the details about what took transpired for us to even like consider this a conversation, right? Even though you and I talk about this as a conversation because I had a personal experience, right, that
Mhm.
needed your services, but I could imagine business is just gonna explode. Um, you know, and I'm saying that in a very like sarcastic way, but because we have this high profile gymnast, highly decorated, the greatest of all time, the GOAT, Simone Biles. Everyone's talked about her, not just since the 2016 Olympics, uh,
Mhm.
and more so in the last couple of years. And, she's not 16 or 12 years old, right? The way we
Yeah.
saw other gymnasts. She's much older, right? But, we have this high profile gymnast all of a sudden say, I can no longer perform,
I need a
right?
break. I need a break.
I
Yeah.
need a moment. I need some time. I need a break. I need to gather myself.
Yeah.
And the uproar, right? I was on Twitter, and my daughter and I woke up at one o'clock in the morning to watch the
Yeah.
team. Then we woke up, we were driving back from Louisiana from a conference, great conference about gymnastics, and we were in awe. We were shocked. What do you mean she's quitting? What she didn't quit. Well, what do you
Yeah.
mean? It's just not.
Stopping. Yeah. Taking a break. What was she
Yeah.
doing?
So like all this conversation now about Simone Biles
Mhm.
and attention, both positive and negative, about her ability to take a
Mhm.
step back.
Mhm. Yeah.
Decision.
The thing that I found most ironic and probably heartwarming with the whole situation was that if you talk to majority of the athletes, if you talk to majority of the gymnasts out there, yes, they wanted her to try. They wanted her to keep going, but they fully understood what was going on. And when you speak to a gymnast about, kind of these mental spots, I hate to call them mental blocks because really it's timing. You need reprogramming. There's ways to work through them. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a full blown boundary that's set. But the aspect of the safety is the most important thing. And when you are, putting yourself at risk, regardless if it's a something that's stemming from your mind that's blocking you from doing it, or it's a physical thing, you need to take a step back because it's not safe to proceed with a sport that you could um, literally crash. That it just wouldn't have been a good decision.
Now,
So we all understand that from the
now,
back.
Tracy, the way you just said that so naturally, though, you so naturally said, you know, whether it is physical
Mhm.
or mental. In many worlds, they don't have the same they don't equal the same thing. They're not on the same
No,
level
no.
of why you take a step back. I recall watching the Olympics and watching Kerry Strug, right? And that's the first thing that came to my mind, right, at that given point. Let's stop for a minute, right, and reflect a little bit about, for those that are watching that are not gymnastics, anything, this is well beyond gymnastics. This
Yeah.
is about like the culture, not just America, I would say, because I think there's many countries and we saw it, but
Yeah.
the brute, rawness that we saw, let's say like in Rocky, right? Remember
Mhm.
that, where they were being energized, and he had all these things from Russia, right? The guy from Russia, I don't
Yeah.
want to, Rocco, and he was becoming a machine, and the idea was to win, and then Rocky okay, so we've been cultured into this thing, like Eye of the Tiger. You got to laser
Yeah.
focus, right?
Yeah.
You got to be both physically strong and mentally strong, and
Mhm.
only the strongest survive, and survival of the fit. All these things that we've been, kind of,
Convinced.
yeah. How
Convinced.
is it that we can now, I mean, and I just feel like we're about to grow, or
Mhm.
hopefully
Mhm.
some of us will start seeing things slightly different. And in New York City in particular, and as well in New York State, we've been having a lot of conversations about mental health,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not in a negative, as if, oh, we got to help that guy because he has a mental health issue, or, these young people, and, there has to be mental health concerns, and, let's address it. Like, we're talking about this amazing individual that has made it has won all kinds of medals, right?
Yeah.
Now ranking number two, ranked equally with Shannon Miller, another gymnast, on the number of medals, more than anyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we still are
Question
having
her
this
decision.
question, her fitness,
Question her
her, like,
decision. Yeah. Yeah.
why didn't she allow someone else to go? She could have,
Yeah.
she had the twisties and has that problem. Why? Wow. I've heard it all from
Yeah.
siblings, from like family, friends who like mention it, like have a little like, jab comment. Like, if she knew that, why did she go? Why didn't she give a spot to somebody
Yeah.
else? Can you
Yeah.
tell us why you have that natural like understanding of health and mental, and what it means beyond gymnastics, right? Because we
Mhm.
know, and as you know, athletes, right? The block. How does that work?
So there's a lot of layers to mental health. And I think social media has, I don't want to say that it's tainted that vision of what actually is best for us as, mankind, like, how we're going to really thrive, appreciating mental health and so forth. But I do believe that it's pieced together. It's actually a very, very delicate subject that needs to be looked at in many different parts. So, mental health is part of our health. It's not part of our, only our brain working. It's part of our brain attaching to our body and our body sending messages back to our brain. And in athletics, that is a necessity. So you look at someone like Simone Biles, and she is who she is because of her sensitivities and because of her ability to read what's going on when her brain sends her body messages, and when her body sends the message back, like, okay, I'm ready. And when there are, kind of miscommunications between those two, you can push and you can reconnect, but there's certain times when you can't. And in Simone's case, I mean, and I'm assuming all of this because I've never spoken to her about this in particular. Um, I'm sure that she really coasted for a lot of her career because she is so naturally talented. And when you meet a barrier in a sport later on, and don't really have the tools to work through these specific things, and you couple that under pressure, it's going to be a lot different than if you met it for the first time in the gym and had years to work through it, including years to work through it in a competition. So that's, the sport aspect of it. When you have a naturally talented athlete, they are ultra sensitive in a good way. But they do need to work with that when it does, cause them some challenges. They need to learn to work through that. On the flip side, as far as, when it involves the public eye, when the public doesn't understand that, we do, and this is part of the work that I do, train the athletes to respond in a way that the public would understand, right? So where she got caught, I think, is saying immediately, it wasn't a physical injury, it was a mental health injury, right? But it would have looked totally different to everyone if she had said, I'm not safe right now. I've got to figure out what's going on, but this is not safe. My attempts will not be safe, especially if it's on the actual equipment in front of people in an arena. And we take a situation like, I don't know the backside, but just what I've read and the research that I've done, someone like Aaron Judge, I mean, they've kept him back and they've said lower leg problems, right? There's no specifics. And we don't pull that apart too much. It's not like, well, what exactly do you mean by lower leg problems? Was it a fracture? If it's not a fracture, then why isn't he on it, right? But if you really read those articles, there's hidden things that are going on more than just a lower leg injury. So there's differences in the way that we look at specific athletes too. And I'm not indicating like a male-female thing by any means, but it's just how it's presented, right? So that requires training when you're at that level and you're going to be in front of the world.
And essentially like PR training from what you're saying, right?
Too. Yeah, it is. And there used to be, I don't know if they do it anymore, but I know in the 92 era, when you reached a certain level, you had a couple classes. Like you were trained, like, okay, this might be something that you would want to say. This would definitely not be something you would want to speak about.
And yet part of me also feels like good for her that she said it.
Yeah. There's that side of it too. Yeah.
Right?
Like, there's a ripple effect either way, right?
I don't know. I mean, like, I was like, good. Whoa, what is this opening, right? Immediately I said, well, I can understand, right? My daughter.
Absolutely.
At a certain point, let's look at this, right? We're talking about what we do with our kids at an early age, right? And kids around adults who like me, who like you and other parents, sometimes perhaps not as empathetic, right? Mm-hmm. Or thoughtful or mindful in the same way, are competitive, hardcore, want to get our children to the next level because there's college scholarships, there's promotional, things, there's the reality of joining the NBA or the NFL and the NCAA, right? You said Division I school, Utah, which we watch all the time. There's the fact that, a lot of, and then I come from a community of color. I'm a Latina who, is trying to raise a strong, young Black woman,
and there's records out there that haven't
Latina,
been.
And, a Latina Black who's like underrepresented in the sport in general, right? Yeah. And then, when there are slights of like weaknesses, like moments that crack, like a mental illness or a mental block or some kind of break or, an ankle or this, when that person no longer is as valuable, a lot of things get called to question about their worth. Yeah. And they go back to a question about self-worth and their connection to that thing that makes them worthy, right?
What made them get the attention in the first place? Yeah.
Yeah, because in another scenario, how, so a couple of things that come to mind, right? And I was just having this discussion, with a lot of different people. And the conference that we attended was Brown Girls Do Gymnastics conference. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was incredible just for my daughter to see a lot of young girls up and coming, strong in their sport, getting used to it. A lot of moms, it was so important for her to feel that connection, Mm-hmm. And yet, I say there's a lot of sports out there that are inaccessible to all communities, not because they shut their doors, Not at all. I mean, I love, the years. We've been at this for 11 years now,
Yeah.
not because anyone shuts their doors. We're gonna experience all kinds of, environmental um, things that are not the norm, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but we're gonna see this in hockey, in lacrosse,
Hmm.
in some sports that have not been dominated or have not been diverse, right?
Yeah.
Because in football, it's a different dynamic. In hockey, in basketball, very different dynamic. Um, but what happens to young kids when they're exposed to this high level of like drama, trauma, things that sometimes as adults we can't even fathom?
Yeah.
But in particular, the sport of gymnastics in the last couple of years has had blow after blow after blow with mass sexual assault on young
Hmm.
girls, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the push and the criticism around how much do you push,
Hmm.
to the point that, again, we go back to self-worth and
Yeah.
value of, and puberty and the dynamics of our young women, right? So many discussions. So what do you do with young people that go to these high level sports with elite sports essentially, or sports that are just not always naturally accessible to everyone? And how do you work with them from a young age for them to develop the kind of tools in the toolbox
Yeah.
that
It's really teaching stamina, and that, if you look at like a marathon runner, they have to learn how to pace themselves, and that's really what it is. So it's a very individual plan, and as much as the group sessions can give the mass kind of the underlying, hey, take care of yourself, make sure that you're stretching, conditioning, eating right. There really is a personal plan that's necessary for each of these athletes when they reach the higher levels. And in gymnastics, the higher levels, it's the upper elite, right? So there's very, very few. So they're kind of spread across the nation. But then you take even one level below that, like a level 10 gymnast, and they're still requiring themselves to be in the gym for about 5 to 6 days a week, and usually 4 to 6 hours a day. So those athletes too, um, they need a plan, and they need it probably starting at age 10. Really, how much sleep do you need? What are the right foods? How are you going to recover? When are you going to recover? You have to plug it into your calendar like it's, scheduled. Actually, the number of hours of sleep are scheduled, and it's a science. It really is a science.
So I'm going to, I think it's important for those folks that are watching right now, and essentially thinking through what it is that we do to our kids, right? How we plan their lives. I looked for a sport when my daughter was young, um, that would give her, an opportunity to grow, right?
Yeah,
And my niece was in the sport, and my daughter still looks up to my niece, looked up to my niece and wanted to do what she did, right?
yeah,
And so
yeah,
that was one entry point.
yeah,
We started in the sport and then started noticing, well, look, she's not that bad.
yeah, yeah,
The next, and she's not that
yeah,
bad. And then the best thing for someone like me is that, she was in practice for like about 3 hours at
yeah,
a young age. You start off at an hour and a half in the rec program, then it's 3 hours, 4 times a week. About, I
yeah.
remember, three,
Keeps
like
them
young,
focused,
it was like
keeps them
3 to 4. It was hard to keep her, focused in the beginning. I remember, but then as she got older, we were looking at 4 hours a day, yeah, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. She had
Yeah.
2 days off, right? And this is through school full time, right? Because we
Mhm.
chose to keep her in school full time. A lot of kids are also homeschooling, right? If they get to the point that they do leave. And this is not, by the way, just gymnastics, right? Like there are
No,
other,
I'm working with some other athletes that are, getting into homeschool too.
and yet
It's
there's a reason why people do this. Why do we do this to our children? I'm just curious because I know why I did it, right? I loved
Yeah.
gymnastics when I was little. I didn't have access to a gym like
Yeah.
gymnastics gym when I was growing up because I was in the inner city. My mom couldn't drive me, my dad. So I wanted to give my daughter what I didn't have, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, yeah, gymnastics is the thing. I was a cheerleader, but gymnastics is harder, right? So in my head, I'm very competitive. So harder, better, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then so many hours versus an after school program that they get to kick the ball or throw the ball or hit a
Many
ball
different things. Yeah.
or running. And I was like, and she didn't like it too much at first, and then
Yeah.
ballet. So why do we do this as just as athleticism is the thing to do, essentially, physically and the whole nine. But
Yeah.
why so young of an age for athletes? And what are the debates on that around, what it does to these kids long term? Because we've read the Simone Biles book, Laurie Hernandez book, and
Yeah.
not good things in there
Yeah,
about.
there's a lot of different stories. I mean, and that's the thing that, everybody has their story. Um, those girls went through a ton of different things than I did. Even my teammates who were coached by the same coaches went through a ton of different things that I did, but the dynamics of their family was a lot different too. So issues were handled a lot differently. I came from a family that, and my mom and I are very close, and we discussed from a very, very early age that whatever went on in the gym was secondhand to what was going to go on in our family and what was important to, the rules of our family and what we lived by. So she said to me, probably when I was 11 or 12, if there's anything at the gym that you don't like or you don't feel comfortable with, you call me right away and you come home. And a lot of my teammates didn't have that openness, the open discussion of like, even if it's just you don't really feel like staying in practice, you can call and come home. And so I just knew that, I was in charge. I was basically in charge of what was going to happen in the gym. And I think it has a lot to do with kind of the rights that you give your kids, that they know they're in charge.
Why haven't you ever said this to me? Do you know that, when my daughter would say to me, Mom, I don't feel like going to the gym, I was like, excuse me? No, we have a commitment. You never miss practice.
Yeah. So there was a difference beforehand if I said I didn't feel like going. But there was the openness of like, if you're there, and I think that was part of probably my mom's safety net. Like, I can see you're at home, and I know you're healthy and ready to go. But if I was at the gym and she didn't know what was going on and I called her and said, I want to come home, I could come home because she wasn't there to judge. So I knew, I knew that she was the one, or even my dad for that matter. I'm not really including him, but he just kind of supported. He wasn't the one that had these conversations about my career really at all. It was more so like, oh, you like the sport? Okay, you can, stay in it. But my mom and I had really the conversations like, is this worth it? And it always came back to her asking me, is it worth it? Do you really want to stay with it? And yeah, there were days when I didn't, but not to the point where I ever wanted to give up that long-term goal of really, first and foremost, seeing how far I could get. That was probably my biggest goal, was an open-ended goal of like, how far can I get? And then it kind of morphed as I realized my capability to the Olympics, and I wanted to train and I wanted to see if that was doable.
It's so interesting because for those that don't understand the sport, whether it's gymnastics or any other sport, and they see a child that excels, immediately what comes to mind is, are you going to the Olympics? Will you be in the
Yes.
Olympics? Are you going, like if a basketball player, if a kid plays basketball and they're really good, they're like, oh, you're going to go to the NFL? And it's like, how do you ask, it's funny because my daughter still gets the question or still gets told, you know, I can't wait to see you in the Olympics. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're done with that way back, you know, and that was never on the, you know, interestingly enough, for me, it's like, hey, I just want to see her through. I just
Yeah.
want her to have a good after school program.
Mm-hmm.
Like, honestly, like a safe
Yeah.
space. I
Yeah.
was happy that it was longer than an hour
Uh-huh.
and it was an organized sport,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And that I felt she was safe as it came to the adults that were with her, the
Mm-hmm.
families that were there. Like I felt, you know, we were all a family. The parents, the you know, the young gymnasts, the sisterhoods that she
Yeah.
developed. I mean, I think once a child hits puberty, essentially, and I felt like we've seen a little bit of a, at least you know, from my experience, you know, a lot of changes that happen in young people, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this, you know, critical stage in their life. But now you see someone like Simone Biles taking that front and center to the world. Is there something about her being 24, right? I think she's 24. Is
Yeah.
there like
Yeah.
a difference about her maturity level and what's important that is kind of helping us look at
I
the
think
sport? Or
so many of the athletes are older now, you know, in comparison to like in the 90s, it was not the case that there were, you know, it was maybe one gymnast would stick with it. And now there's like a pocket of gymnasts. And I know in swimming, it's kind of been the
yeah,
case too, that a lot of the, you know, the top swimmers come back and they do like several Olympics. It amazes me. But I do believe that it does change. Um, like you have a 16-year-old on the team and they see this 24-year-old and it gives them a different perspective on the training, because I know that at 16 you're still in that mode, like I have to do this. I just have to. This is what I do, right? My parents bring me to practice, my coach tells me what to do and I have to do this. And then
mhm,
by 20 it's like, well, I choose to do this. And
mhm.
then beyond that, it's okay, how far, again, it's that like, how far can I get? Can I keep going? Am I going to do another Olympics or a world championship or something like that? So for the 16-year-olds to see that too, I think that's really an amazing piece. I know Michael Phelps talks about that, like when he would kind of joke around with the older swimmers and so forth when he was younger. But I do believe that it gives them a vision that they wouldn't see by just being around, you know, a bunch of 16 to 18-year-olds, because the talk starts to change. You really do understand that you choose to do sport and you're not, you don't have to, you're not forced into it.
And now with social media, right, in the
Yeah.
mix, unlike when we were growing up and we were seeing things, I mean, as a cheerleader, we would go to compete to other neighborhoods, right, outside of my
Yeah.
own neighborhood. And we noticed the difference economically, we noticed the difference racially.
Mhm.
We just noticed the differences now with, and that's if we traveled, right? If you were able to get out of your neighborhood and go to
Yeah,
the,
now it's constant, right?
now it's nonstop. The
Yeah.
world around them is on TikTok, on YouTube, on, you know,
Mhm.
Instagram, Twitter, you name it, they're exposed to it.
Yeah.
How do you help young athletes, right? And it goes, because at least for me, working with you and having Victoria work with you was well beyond athleticism, well
Yeah.
beyond kind of gymnastics. It was well like helping her manage the world through the
Mhm.
lens of her sport, but
Yeah.
having her be able to see who she is, not what she does as who she is. And I think you talked about that, right? What do we tell these parents who forget about just elite sports? What is participating in sports, period? And the next, these kinds of extracurricular add to the repertoire while at the same time we're able to talk about real world things in these in through sport, right?
Yeah, I think sport presents one aspect of, you know, what you're saying as far as social media goes and the different opinions and situations that are brought up. It really, I can kind of equate it to like when you're in the grocery store and you see the tabloids, and when your child for the first time realizes like what they're looking at, and they ask you, is that real? Is it like, did that really happen? And that's kind of how you have to teach them. Like, no, that's kind of tabloid talk, and this is really what might be going on, right? They might have extracted a certain piece of that, but it's not, the whole entire picture. And then also just distraction control is so important for these kids, especially, they have phones at such a young age. That's a distraction, right? And you need to close that down, like not the phone itself, but even just what's coming into it. We had to do that, but in a much smaller amount, because like you said, you're traveling to the spot. You're actually meeting the person who might be distracting you, versus this is like you flip up to the next picture and that's a distraction. And it just breeds this like huge bed of distractions that you could get lost in. So it's a constant conversation of teaching them, these are the important things. This is what's going to actually move you forward. And that could just keep you stuck, and you could stay in that forever. So really,
it sounds to me like what you're saying too is that, depending on the child, depending on the kind of, I guess it depends on everything, right? Like some kids thrived during COVID on Zoom, for example, and did well on their own. Others needed the one-on-one, the, teacher attention, the other students in the classroom for social attention, even though I think for all of us, there's an element that we're missing, that interaction that allows us to all grow, both as adults and young people, right? One of the things that I know that comes up often, let kids be kids. Let them be kids. My brother says, let her be a normal teenager, and I'm like, well, hold on,
define that.
And so I stop and I wonder, and I remember in tears, I was devastated for like a whole day around my daughter deciding she no longer wanted to do the sport. And I was like, hold on a second. For 20 hours a week, 20 hours, right? I knew where my daughter was.
Yeah.
I knew she was doing her sport and she was staying physically fit. And, she hasn't ever been a bad eater. I was looking out for her physical health, right? Her safety. I had not stopped to talk about her mental health. Like, she walked in through the door. How are you doing? How was practice? You're good? Yeah, I'm great. But I'm thinking, what you do? I started learning the names to the thing. And, some parents that I watch still posting about their kids, athletic abilities or, getting accepted to, these colleges beyond gymnastics. What are some of the talking points that you can share with parents and with friends of parents and with families or people who work with young people? Forget about, relationships now. People who work with young people.
Yeah.
What kinds of questions should we be asking these young people beyond what they're doing? How was school? Not just did you get a good grade, right? How was practice? Not did you, score a goal, or how was the, what kinds of things can people start asking that helps them be empathetic to talking or opening them up about what's going on in their heads?
One of the things is just to have kind of the goal to get to know them. And it kind of sounds funny to say that to parents, but your child is constantly developing. So to say to them, get to know your child, is not necessarily that crazy. Because their brains, like I said, are constantly changing. So there are connections that are being made that just because you live in the same household with them, you don't know about. So to approach the conversation like, hey, what's the most interesting thing that you learned today or saw today or thought about today? And don't expect an answer, because sometimes teens don't want to give you an answer, but at least you planted that seed, that, hey, I'm interested in something beyond just like the typical how was school, like you said, how was gym. And the other thing is to involve them in what you're doing by asking them for some advice every once in a while. So they're not always thinking that you're smarter than them or that you know more, that you're more worldly than them, that it's something that, you know, you can involve them in your life to make some important decisions too. And if anything, even if they don't have an answer, it gets them thinking, you know, beyond just the typical, hey, how was your day conversation.
Yeah, I kind of think that, you know, in very high, you know, in communities of color and in places where, you know, there are economic difference and disadvantages, you know, we're having a conversation about a sport that is not typically accessible in many neighborhoods. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
open to everyone, but it's not a natural. So the privilege is there. Let's not get it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we have that I could put in or make the time to ensure that my daughter went through all these days of practice and that I found support
Yeah.
and I found help, that's a privilege in and of itself. Forget
Yeah.
about the financial, you know,
The
contributions
time.
to the
Absolutely.
sport. It is the time, you
Yeah.
know. So for a lot of these young people who don't have the parent who stays at home, which I don't, who works full time and has to pick them up and drop them off, or doesn't pick them up and drop them off. Maybe they walk to the corner, you know, to the
Yeah.
school afterwards. Maybe they walk, you know, to the Taekwondo center and, you know, are there for that kind of time. You know, what are some of the, you know, skill sets that a young person needs, like, you know, tools, right? Like journaling
Yeah.
or meditating. I mean, I know people think that that's nuts, but maybe stuff that we can encourage from afar if we cannot be so tediously involved. Now,
Yeah.
I promote someone being always involved, right? But it is not
Yeah.
that.
I think it's back to the distraction control. You know, that kind of is like the root of so much of it, because you can use that idea with so many things that kids get involved with. Like, you know, they might have a focus, they might have an idea of what they want to be, but then they're distracted by this person or other, you know, friend, or even not necessarily a good role model, but what they're perceiving as a role model that's doing something else. And it's easy access to them, right? It's at the park or it's on their phone. And I mean, I know I have it with my own boys where it's like, that might not be the one that you want to be watching an hour of today. You know, that's not the
Yeah.
conversation that I want you to be listening to over and over again, or the music that I want you to be hearing over and over again. So it's repetition. You want to look at that and how much will that repetition of what they're doing distract them from something that's a little bit more important and kind of nourishing to their brain. And you
So
can do that from afar. You just, you know, say like, these are the long-term consequences if you're constantly in that state of mind.
So I know that I do a lot of, you know, self-help reading, right? And I read this book called Relentless by Tim
Mhm.
Grover, right? And he
Mhm.
talks immediately about NBA players and the cream of the crop having these, you know, needing to talk to him like immediately, like on the money because they have a game tomorrow and they needed to speak to someone.
Yeah.
And I yet never seen the high profile level, the
Mhm.
way in which the scrutiny of Naomi Osaka, first of all, the
Mhm.
Japanese tennis player, and unfortunately we couldn't have Gemma on, Alexander Muzik, who is a tennis coach, you know, for men's tennis at York College, and she was going to talk a little bit about, you know, Naomi Osaka and that dynamic in the sport,
Yeah.
and you know, recall you talking about that public eye and the reality
Mhm.
of all these gymnasts being in, not just gymnasts, but these athletes having high profile like endorsements and expectations, you know, going into all these dynamics. But, you know, how do we, as those individuals watching and everyone else, have a profound conversation or beyond conversation, move forward, right? After this, and what should we be expecting? How do we help others move? Forget about it, breaking it down. I'm not about to break down why she couldn't just get an
Yeah.
alternate. why that happened, what the twisty is. I think she did a lot of that on her Instagram post.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
a lot of that has happened. But this redefining what it means to be gold, what it means, and what does it cost, right? We had we're talking about hundreds that came out against Larry Nassar and that scandal, right? And the acceptance of certain things that take place. It could happen in the workplace, as we saw in the state of New York recently, right? Or it can happen, in a supposed to be a safe space. And we've seen this through the years, right? Happen in religious institutions and happen in so many places where we're just putting some curtains on a bad view.
Yeah.
And yet this is now part of our history as a country. How do we help shape the narrative? What's some takeaways that you think, when I'm talking to some gym parents, or, my daughter when she's talking to her friends, or, anyone, how can we begin to open this up as a stronger narrative of raising leaders and raising people that are empathetic and helping to close the gap on some of these issues that we've neglected for so long?
I think one of the most important things to start with is to allow everyone as an individual has to allow other people to have their thoughts and feelings. And then it makes you feel better. Because I had a conversation with a couple athletes this week that, they were struggling with their parents' expectations of them. And that was really ringing heavy in their ears as they would go to practice. And we only remember parts and pieces of conversations. So when we question ourselves and we have a conversation where other people might be giving their opinion on what they think about us, we can twist that conversation in our head if we go over it more than once, and we can turn what they say into something very negative, when in reality that might not be the message that they're sending. So I think the most important thing to start with is to allow people to really have their own opinion and to be able to set that boundary that that's their opinion and not ours. And it doesn't need to be something that, we necessarily have to use as our own mantra.
I mean, Tracy, you like I said, you say it so naturally. Like, people should have their own opinions, and that's okay. Like, accepting, for number one, like a basic, everyone's entitled to an opinion. Now, opinions are not facts; they're opinions, and since an early age, we get taught to decipher between things written that are opinion pieces, right, versus facts, and we're taught. And it's so interesting that a basic concept, as numerous opinions exist. Some opinions are not weighted on facts, right? They're not built upon facts. And extremely important, both as a parent as well as, an adult in society, to be able to know the difference, understand that people's opinions are shaped on their experiences and their circumstances, right? And, sometimes even being able, and I fall into this trap with my own daughter where I'm saying, where I'm like, whoa, did you stop them right there? Like, because that's not, and then I'm like, well, why does she need to, right? That's that person's opinion. That's not a battle she needs to fight. But, as a country, we're definitely, I foresee having numerous conversations about this subject matter, right? About mental health. I know in the city of New York, the mayors had a huge debate, and this came out both negative and in a positive way about, how to help, especially post-COVID, right? What are some of the signs with, our young people that, we can see that potentially we should be, kind of alerted to, that they may need to speak to someone, or,
I think it's important to look at both ends of the spectrum. So you have the kids that do kind of blurt out stuff, and they use that for attention seeking purposes. And that's a lot of the conversation, like, now that it's the language they're using, these terms like, oh, it's my mental health and so forth. Regardless of what they're using, there's a reason for it. So get beyond the term, right?
Yeah.
And figure out the reason for it. That would be one idea. The
In other
next
words,
one,
when Victoria says, I need a mental health day, I need to see, well, why? And what is
yeah,
this? Not
yes.
just
What
mental
gap
health.
are you feeling that you don't feel is tight enough for you just to, kind of like suck it up, right? Where are you feeling that gap? And have her categorize it. These kids really need to narrow it down rather than just using this global mental health term. And that's kind of what I was getting at before. Like it's a delicate term in part because it's so big, right? It encompasses so many things. And if we just throw it out there, then nobody's really going to get to the core of what the issue is anyway. The other end of the spectrum is a change in behavior, just a true change in behavior. Like, was your child talkative and now they're not? Were they with their friends and now they're not? Or are they a kid that loved to kind of be home with the family and now they're out all the time, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that being out with your friends is a bad thing, but if it's a sudden and constant change, then you might want to just investigate why. What are the reasons for it? So big changes in behavior would be something that I would kind of tease apart and figure out what's going
Now,
on.
you and I spoke during the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you also had a chance last year to see Victoria, and I know you were working on a project.
Mm-hmm.
I briefly asked you about it. I was so like into it because, knowing that when Victoria was young, I had no common sense of this sport or anything. In regards to getting them in a sport, we see the horse race all the time to get to the top, and this
Yeah.
mindset of go 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 go
Yeah.
go. Had I taken a step back then and learned about taking a break, then I wouldn't probably have been so gung ho about you can't miss one practice, because in my head, you miss
Yeah.
one practice, it's training you miss, it's it's your skill set, it's your strength. You're gonna get hurt the next time. I was
Yeah.
like, not allowing it. Now I'm much more relaxed. But tell me a little bit about your project.
So
Um,
the idea from it stemmed from my thesis actually during my master's, where I went in with worked with children with behavioral disorders in a hospital. It was a residential treatment center actually, so they were there for 6 months to some of them 2 years. And I really wanted to get in and work beyond just medication being the only thing that was really helping these kids, because I thought that there was a broader treatment plan available and they weren't using it, in part coming from sports psychology. They could really, I felt that they could grasp, a little bit of relaxation, a little bit of visualization, kind of coupled that with some of the trauma that they had been through and so forth. So we ran, several weeks of a program introducing these kids to these various, mindful activities. And I revisited that during COVID, and it actually started the summer before, but during COVID, I really had the time to work on it. I wrote a book and illustrated pictures of kids going through fear, just the general term of fear, and created a different perspective for them to look at fear like something that wasn't necessarily going to grow in their mind, that it was something that they could talk to and talk down, and then eventually use as adrenaline, a source of adrenaline, and help them through whatever the situation that they were fearing. And we use this in sports a lot. You don't have to get nervous because you're nervous. You can just use those nerves as an energy source. So that was something that I thought, well, the kids that I used to work with at the hospital, they grasped on and enjoyed using the relaxation and visualization that I taught them. So they could kind of use this fear strategy too. And the earlier that you teach kids these things, the better, because then when they they approach a situation with tools, they're much more in tune with using it and developing it in a way that works for them, rather than trying to teach, a teenager or an adult something after they've been through several, traumatic situations and kind of have that negative attitude towards it, like nothing will work. It's better to get the youngsters.
We're still in the midst of the pandemic. I know young people are essentially going to hopefully be headed back to school finally, and I know that there's, this is well beyond sports now, right?
Yeah.
They get butterflies in their stomach. We sometimes think they got tummy aches. They get fever. They start sweating and they start these are all real things for our young people. The folks getting diagnosed general anxiety disorders, right? Like, things like, depression and issues that young people may not open up, and some really young may not be able to express. But, you got this, and your concept of trying to, explain to young kids about what fear is and how to overcome it and kind of tackle it, right? I remember being told, Lucia, you gotta break it down, take it in chunks. Do not try to topple it all at once, right? I was under the understanding you got to get it done, get it done, get it done.
Yeah,
and,
no small goals.
That's right. And you spoke to Victoria about breaking it down in small goals. So I want to invite folks to check out your, Aspire Performance Instagram page, right? In the next couple of, weeks, I'll be adding more stuff to the Critica NYC Instagram page. But Traci, I want to thank you, not just for, having helped me cope and help me cope, but accepting this invitation to kind of be here with us.
Absolutely.
And if is there anything else you would like to tell us?
Just the most important thing is that when you have, these young kids and they come to you with, like you said, the tummy ache or something that's a little off, there are tools out there. So it's important to investigate and kind of, use them.
Pay attention, because we're going to be seeing a lot more of these conversations to come, especially now, and hopefully more Simone Biles as she guides us through. I'm sure we're going to see many more major companies grab on to the realities of what happens in the mind. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.